Hi everyone, this is going to be a comparison and swatch video for Huda Beauty's Winter Highlighter Palette and Wet n Wild's MegaGlo Highlighting Palette. So I'm sure many of you have seen that these look very similar to each other, and so we're going to, in this video, swatch each product separately. I will give you a brief review or first impressions of what I think of the formula for each separate palette, and then we're going to compare them to see if the Wet n Wild palette is a more affordable dupe for the Huda Beauty palette. You can purchase the Huda Beauty palette through Sephora and the Wet n Wild palette through Ulta. I will put the links in the description box below to where you can find and purchase each of these if you are interested. In this video, I will apply them also to the cheeks so that you can see footage of how they look in comparison to each other. So I hope you're subscribed so you don't miss out on videos like this, and let's get looking at the Wet n Wild and Huda Beauty highlighting palettes. And here are the palettes side by side. You can see that the Wet n Wild palette is larger. The pans are also larger in size. The Wet n Wild one does not have the names imprinted on each pan for the names. So in terms of the amount of product you get, the Wet n Wild palette says that it's 0.19 ounces or 5.4 grams each. So if that's for each pan, then you would end up with a total of 21.5, a little more than 21.5 grams of product total. And then for the Huda Beauty palette, it looks like the total amount of product you get is 1 ounce or 28.5 grams. So you do get a little more product with the Huda Beauty palette. So let's first swatch the Huda Beauty highlighter palette. This is the Winter Solstice palette. It is limited edition, and I believe it may be exclusive to Sephora also. It retails for $45. It does not contain a mirror. It has this protective sheet here with the full-size image and then the 4 highlighting shades inside. It's nice that each name is imprinted in the palette under each pan. So we will go from top row left to right and then bottom row left to right. So there is Frosted Kiss. This is actually a cream shadow first. And then we have Arctic Glow, which is a powder, followed by Northern Lights, another powder, and finishing up with Winter Rose, which is also a powder highlight. So in terms of the description for the Huda Beauty palette, the company says that these are 1 pearlescent cream powder and then pressed powder highlighters that have a smooth as butter melted strobe formula. So in terms of the company's description, it describes the cream highlighters having a smooth as butter melted strobe formula, and then the powder highlighters also have a creamy formula created or handmade by Huda herself. They're supposed to give you a holographic glow with light reflecting pearls. So first up, I will swatch with my finger the cream highlighter. This is Frosted Kiss. It is an icy iridescent pink. And then we have Arctic Glow, which is a warm blue multi-tonal illuminator. And this has good color payoff, so you don't really need to add a second layer, though I will for the camera. Next up is Northern Lights, which the company describes as a holographic highlighter with duochrome tones in soft gold and bronze. Wouldn't necessarily say that's holographic, but it is yellow and gold in tone. Again, really don't need it, but I will build up a second layer for intensity. And then we have Winter Rose, which is a dusty pink. It says infused with a shot of silver. I'm definitely going to add a second layer to this one. I'm not sure if I don't know if that's a silver flash. Yeah, I guess I would say it's a silver flash as opposed to a golden flash. Alright, so there are your 4 highlighting shades from the Huda Beauty Winter Solstice palette. That cream shade has a strong flash of pink, and I like the middle 2 shades in terms of formulation. I think the pink shade at the very end has the least impressive formulation, and I thought maybe it was because I was swatching at the end of the arm toward the wrist. Sometimes they get a little more patchy on this end because of like the ligaments and stuff in your wrist, but I tried swatching it on the other side of my arm and it still was not as smooth as the two middle shades there. So that's just an FYI for you. The colors are very pretty, so that's what those look like. And next to swatch is the Wet n Wild highlighting palette. This retails for $14.99 through Ulta. This also does not have a mirror inside. This is what the pans look like inside. They are embossed with a flower, it looks like. Now, all four of these shades are powders as opposed to the one cream in the Huda Beauty palette. So this first shade is Sweet Peony, followed by Diamond Lily, Wild Cosmos, and Blushing Azalea. Alright, so here's Sweet Peony, which on the skin comes off as a shimmering frost. The slightest hint of maybe pale champagne. Again, very good payoff on the first swatch. I'll add just a little more for a layer. Second up is Diamond Lily, which looks like a steel blue in the pan. On the skin, it comes off as a silver with the slightest hint of blue. Let's add another layer and see what we get. Yeah, pretty much the same. I think if you didn't have it compared to the first swatch already, you would think it was just a shimmering silver shade. But it does have a hint of blue in it. Next up is Wild Cosmos, which in the pan looks like a green gold. I think on the skin it looks pretty much like a soft gold. Adding a little more. Yeah, comes off as a shimmering gold on the skin. Not too much green, or really any green that I can see. And finally is Blushing Azalea. This is not coming off on the skin very nicely. It does, even in the pan, you can tell it has larger chunks of glitter in it. Here's a second layer. Oh, now we're starting to see a little bit of color here. It's a little bit of silvery pink on this one, but it definitely does not have the same effect as the other three powders. Okay, and there are the Wet n Wild highlighting powder shades up close. Alright, so now I'm going to do finger swatches of both palettes. We'll start with the Huda Beauty one. This is the Cream Shadow Frosted Kiss. Next is Arctic Glow, Northern Lights, and Winter Rose. And then for the Wet n Wild shades, you have Sweet Peony to start, then Diamond Lily, Wild Cosmos, and Blushing Azalea. Alright, so there are the Huda Beauty finger swatches, the Wet n Wild finger swatches, and if we look at them side by side, you can see that there seems to be more color intensity on the Huda Beauty ones. The gold shades are probably the closest in comparison. The other ones are, you know, not as close. Both of them seem to apply fairly well with the exception of the last shades, which is funny because both of the last shades in each palette are not as impressive as the other three shades. Alright, so there are the two highlighting palettes compared to each other. So obviously the biggest difference is going to be the price point. The Wet n Wild one is a third of the price of the Huda Beauty palette. So you have to really ask yourself, do I want to pay 3 times more for what I get from the Huda Beauty palette? And the answer might be yes. The Huda Beauty palette, I like that there's the cream shade included in there to give you a totally different effect on the skin. The shades are more pigmented, although that can go both ways because they get to be a little harder to wear once they have a lot of color to them. The Winter Rose shade, like I've already expressed, I'm not as impressed with, but the other shades I think are very lovely. Conversely, the Wet n Wild palette at just about $15 still has a very nice soft formula. Again, that last shade was not as impressive as the other ones. And the pigmentation, or the color I should say, they're softer in effect in the Wet n Wild palette, which again can go both ways. If you want something with a lot more variety, then you would want to go with the Huda Beauty palette. If you want something that is more wearable while still having a little bit of color variation, then you would want to go with the Wet n Wild palette. So those are my initial thoughts for the palettes compared to each other. Let me know in the comment section below what you think of these two palettes. I hope that you enjoyed watching this video. As always, thank you for taking the time to watch, and I'll see you in the next upcoming videos.